Welcome to this special interactive leader session, Meet the President-Elect Candidates. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pat Gould, Managing Director of Marketing and Communications for the SOA. If you need technical assistance at any time today, click on Live Technical Support in the Links area on the left-hand side of your screen, or send an email to soa@compartners.com. You can also download a copy of the slides from the links box. You can enter a question for the candidates at any time by clicking in the chat window in the lower corner of your screen. Be sure to click the send button on the right-hand side of the chat window to submit the question. I'd like to start by introducing the participants for today's interactive leader session. We have Errol Kramer, current President-Elect of the SOA. He will be moderating the discussion with our President-Elect candidates. And of course, we have our candidates, Jennifer Gillespie, Craig Reynolds, and Jim Glickman. I'll now turn it over to Errol, who will provide an overview of today's session.
Well, thank you, Pat. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The SOA elections open August the 18th, and they'll close September the 5th at 5 p.m. sharp Central Time. In this election, you'll be voting for the SOA board, and this includes the President-Elect as well as the section councils. Primary purpose of today's session is to learn more about the views of our President-Elect candidates so you can make an informed decision when it comes time to vote. Whenever you have more than two candidates for President-Elect, as we do this year, we use what we call the preferential voting method. The voting will then be decided as follows. You will have an option to select your first candidate as well as your second candidate. To win, a candidate must receive a majority of valid votes cast. First choice votes are counted initially. If no candidate receives the necessary majority of first choice votes, the candidate receiving the smallest number of first choice votes is eliminated, and the second choice votes of that candidate's ballots are then redistributed among the two remaining candidates. If there are two tied candidates, the winner is determined by the larger number of first choice votes, and if that's tied, then I guess we go to coin toss. Let me explain how today's session will work. We'll start off by having the candidates introduce themselves and briefly discuss their visions for their terms as President-Elect and President. I will ask each candidate one question, and this question was shared with the President-Elect candidates in advance. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to these and all my other questions. We'll open up for the Q&A portion of the session, and you're encouraged to submit your questions by typing them in the Ask a Question box and clicking Go. We received some questions in advance of the webcast, and I'll be including some of these as well. When submitting questions, please do not direct your questions to a specific candidate. We want each candidate to have the opportunity to answer the same questions. I'm sure our candidates would be more than happy to respond to individual questions via email. So let's get started. Jennifer, please introduce yourself. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Gillespie. I'm here from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, where I am the Vice President of Underwriting for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. The scope of my responsibilities there include all of our commercial markets, so that's individuals, small groups, large groups, all the way up through our national employers. And my team does eligibility checking for the smaller end of the market and financial underwriting for the larger end. I began my volunteering with the Society of Actuaries through the sections, and I was on the section council for the Management and Personal Development Section Council and then the Health Section Council. And once I was on the board, I've had many different roles, including board partner to the Education and Research Section and to the Technology Section. I've done facilitating for fellowship admissions courses. I chaired the Public Policy Task Force. I worked on the team that created the Research Executive Committee. I've been chairing the Finance Committee. I was on the Strategic Planning Committee. So I feel like I've had a well-rounded exposure to the different responsibilities that exist in the board. I currently serve as Secretary-Treasurer, and in that role, I participate on the weekly calls with the presidential officers to oversee emerging issues. And I think that means I'm up to speed with the current topics, and I hope that makes me ready to step into the role of President-Elect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We'll have Craig Reynolds talk next. Craig, please introduce yourselves. You also have 2 minutes.
My name is Craig Reynolds. I'm a principal with the life insurance consulting practice of Milliman, where I co-manage our Seattle office. This summer I celebrated my 25th anniversary with the firm after working short stints at John Hancock and Farmers No World Life. I never planned to be an actuary. I was studying pure mathematics in a PhD program at the University of Washington after graduating from MIT. I dropped out of grad school to go back to Boston to get married and shortly found a position as an actuarial student. Like many of us, I rapidly got hooked on the field and I never looked back. As a 23-year-old kid, it was hard to dislike a field that offered a challenge, variety, and a pay raise whenever you pass an exam. Early in my career, I worked primarily as a modeler and in software support and development. Mostly now I focus on business development and practice management, as well as SOA volunteer work, though I support my team in a variety of projects related to in-force management, asset liability management, product pricing, mergers and acquisition, and other financial forecasting and valuation-related tasks. Our team is about 27 full-time staff. I've been an active SOA or local actuarial club volunteer for almost my entire actuarial career, beginning with exam committee service, continuing on to serve as secretary, vice president, and president of the Seattle Actuarial Club. I've written a number of articles for section newsletters and spoken many times at SOA meetings. I've also served on the Financial Reporting Section Council and currently serve on the SOA board. On the board, I've had a number of roles related to international expansion, the CAE program, research, and section council support for the product development section and the financial reporting section. Now I'm seeking your vote to be the next President-Elect so that I can continue to implement my vision for the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. We now have Jim Glickman. Jim, please introduce yourselves. You also have 2 minutes.
Hello, this is Jim Glickman. I'm the President and CEO of Life Care Assurance Company. Life Care, which many of you may not be familiar with, is a reinsurer that specializes exclusively in the long-term care insurance marketplace. I actually got my start as an actuary when I took my first actuarial exam in high school. I selected the University of Michigan to go to college because it had, at the time, what I felt was the best long-term care program in the country. Likewise, I had a career starting with Maccabees Mutual, then I worked for a company called Pacific Standard, another company called Pencor. That was the first 15 years of my career. And then I have been with Life Care as the President and CEO since 1988, 26 years total. We built Life Care from scratch. We took $3 million of borrowed funds and turned it into what is now a $2 billion reinsurer. I have been very involved in the long-term care industry in particular. I started the long-term care section as its original founding chairperson. We recruited the 200 members we needed to become a section, and then I served for 5 years on the section council, the first year and the 5th year as the chairperson of the section council. I then became an SOA board member. I was there for 3 years. I then had another 2-year stint as the SOA vice president. I have also become the executive director of the ILTCI, which is the Long-Term Care Conference Association. It's given me a very unique view of how the nonprofit association world works, the opportunities for making programs better, the opportunities for saving money, and the opportunities to enhance the people who get to participate in. I hope to bring many of these visions and opportunities that I've learned as that executive director to my presidency as SOA President-Elect.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for your introductory remarks. As I said earlier, one question was given to the 2 candidates, actually 3 candidates in advance, so they've had time to consider the response. We'll start with the question, and Jennifer will answer it first. Here's the question. Describe a time in which you had to help a group sort through competing demands and set priorities. How did you approach the task, and what did you learn from the experience? Jennifer?
Thank you, Earl. as I said in my introduction, I'm a healthcare actuary, so my situation is going to be healthcare reform. Heading up underwriting, we obviously went through a lot of disruption as we got ready to implement for 1/1/14. And corporately, we had many, many systems that needed to be changed. So there were competing demands for resources and subject matter experts, etc. The way that we approached it was first to understand what does it mean for underwriting. So I needed to have a good sense of what the impact on the systems that my team used would be and what we thought was most important to change. And we had a new business underwriting system and a renewal system, both of which seemed like high priorities. And so you start with your nucleus of understanding, and then you start meeting with people from other areas of the company and understand what the implications are in their areas. And I think it's really important that you understand your own and then listen carefully to what you hear from other areas. So it turned out, of course, that the underwriting systems don't just live in isolation. They have information that flows in and information that flows out. And so that all has implications for other areas. As we set a priority, we decided that things that were external facing needed to be the first things that got fixed. So you go back to all of the pieces and you reconsider then what seems to be the most important. And it's not necessarily my underwriting systems. In fact, it actually, if I would have picked which of those two systems we would work on first, I would have picked the new business system because it seemed like it needed the most changes. But we actually ended up fixing the renewal system. And so I think communication is one of the really big experiences that you take as an outcome. When you start reaching across the company, it's important that you don't use acronyms. Those create people that are in and out of a subject. You also risk that an acronym means something different in a different area. So I think communication and being very careful with that was our biggest learning.
Thank you, Jennifer. Craig, could you please respond? I'm sorry, let's do, yes. Craig, I think you're up next.
Thank you, Errol. As a consultant, we face these sorts of issues all the time. Our workflow ebbs and flows, and we need to be careful not to be overstaffed at any given time. So as a consequence, sometimes we have more work than we can handle gracefully. Broadly speaking, we have a few options when we're in this situation. We can work smarter, finding a more efficient way to complete the work, which obviously is something we're striving for all the time anyway. We can get help, borrowing staff from other teams or from the clients, which is something we, again, will try to do to control cost when we can. We can work harder, burning the midnight oil, putting more hours into the staff, or we can shift priorities and negotiate for other deadlines. I obviously prefer the first two options when we can, but sometimes for one reason or another, these just don't work out. And we can't always rely on working the staff harder. Eventually we burn them out, and it's not very much fun for anyone. So sometimes we come down to the fourth option of shifting priorities and negotiating, which certainly requires a bit of fact-finding. Which deadlines are firm? Which deadlines have some flexibility? Sometimes there'll be interim deadlines associated with a project that are not as important as the final deadline. Can tasks be broken down into smaller chunks so that by delivering on the first few pieces, we can keep our customers happy for a while before we move in to create some time for moving on to the next task? What it really comes down to is some basic needs assessment and listening and fact-finding. What do the clients really need? What can the staff really do? What resources are available to us? There's almost always a way to make these mesh if we take the time to understand the needs of the clients and the resources we have available.
Thank you, Craig. Jim, could you please respond?
Thank you, Earl. I'd like to talk about it in more of a general fashion. In actuality, having been the executive director for the Long-Term Care Conference Association, which is a group of all volunteers who put together the Long-Term Care Conference each year, I encounter this every year because people have limited amounts of time that they can spend on activities. However, what I have found is with an all-volunteer group, and the SOA board also is an all-volunteer group, that when you get people involved in the areas of a particular topic where they have passion and interest, they tend to expand the hours they do with that. They tend to have better experiences, and they tend to bring back better results. What's more, you don't need to limit yourself to the fixed number of volunteers you have. If you have an area that doesn't have somebody who has a passion for that particular area, you go out and find a volunteer who has passion and knowledge for that area. You can always expand your volunteer base to attack these processes. In the board setting, I would envision that what we should do is we should task out to these various volunteers the different activities and do only those things that involve the decision-making at the board, rather than doing a lot of the research and work during board meetings. I think it will allow us to tackle a lot more topics. It will allow us to do things much better, and it will give all the membership better results from all of our activities. I'll give you a specific example of where this occurred. Back in 2009, as part of the healthcare reform, there was some little piece of it called the Class Act. And the Class Act was something that the long-term care industry was lobbying actively against through AHIP, which is the lobbying association for the long-term care and health industry. They had a conference call to discuss plans, and I suggested at that meeting that we get a group of actuaries together to put a paper together explaining why a voluntary purchase, fixed price program was destined to failure, and also was a guaranteed issue. And they basically took the position, which is not surprising, that we need an answer in 3 months. We don't need it in 6 years. We explained that we could put this group of interested volunteers together. We met twice a week. We put out a paper with the help of the Academy within the 3-month period. It actually changed the legislation. It went from a fixed $75 cost per person up to essentially a number around $300 that had to be guaranteed to be survivable by the fund out of contributions from the people who were doing it for 75 years. It changed the legislation such that the Class Act actually wound up, although being passed, never implemented because it never was on a sound basis. And it eliminated a third program for society that would have been very disastrous.
Thank you, Jim. We'll now go to questions posed from members. Craig, you'll start with this question, and I'll read it off now. The SOA is a US-based international organization with strong ties to Canada, and with a fast-growing membership in other countries, notably China and the rest of Asia. What are your views on the benefits and risks of expanding beyond North America, and what should the SOA do to best serve this growing membership? Craig?
Thank you, Errol. First, I want to point out that international is a strong passion of mine. Besides working in North America, I've worked in a number of countries around the world, in Asia and Latin America particularly, and somewhat in Europe. I'm a strong believer that international expansion is and should be a high priority for the Society of Actuaries. By moving out internationally, we create more opportunities for actuaries who would like to work internationally or who may work for a company that has an international parent. They'll have more credibility if their credential is one that is recognized internationally. So I think there's no doubt that it serves our North American members well if we have an international presence. I would not want to work in a profession where, for example, we were a North American organization and the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries or some other organization was completely dominating the rest of the world. I don't think that would be good for us. I think that one of the best ways in order to do that is to identify markets that we're interested in. Largely, that has in recent years been a matter of looking at China and other markets in Asia. More recently, I've been involved in an effort to look at expansion opportunities in Latin America as well. I think we need to identify these markets, provide marketing materials in these markets, provide on-the-staff resources in those markets, such as we have, or on-the-ground staff resources in these markets, as we have in Southeast Asia and Canada. And to the extent practical, look at developing exam material that is appropriate and consistent with the needs in these markets, and also continue to support educational efforts of the universities in these markets. Thank you.
Jim?
I would like to say that I feel the SOA is clearly the premier provider of education and research. And as such, we should make those services available around the world. However, I believe that we should do that through working with the other organizations where they exist and providing it directly where they don't. I think it is truly important that the actuarial profession as a whole bring out a single view of what is right and what is wrong, and should not have any squabbling with regard to who does it and how it's provided. I think that as long as we do work closely with all these other associations, we can establish a reason why they will want to use our educational resources. And I think that if we figure out with these organizations how to best organize these efforts and make sure that there aren't redundancies, we'll be able to provide that to everybody, and everybody will desire to get that.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer?
I agree that it's very important to expand the desirability of our credentials internationally. We want all actuaries practicing to have professionalism standards and be viewed as having high integrity. In particular, for our membership who is outside of North America, I think it's important that we look at how do we have webcasts that are in an appropriate time for them to participate? How do we have professional development offered that is local? How do we do research partnering with organizations that are existing in other places so that it's helpful to practitioners in those other countries? I think we need to listen to our members who are practicing in other countries to say what do they need from us and how are they willing to volunteer and be part of bringing a solution to those marketplaces. So I think we start from the base of both our education that we're already delivering and then our research, that's our other key area. And we have already started on this, and we keep building on it to meet the needs of practitioners in other marketplaces.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'll now direct my question to Jim. Some have said that the demand for actuaries is in danger of declining if we maintain a narrow focus on traditional actuarial jobs in the insurance and benefits industry. What are your thoughts on this matter, and what would you do to mitigate the risk? Jim?
Yes, this is one of the areas that I have a great deal of passion for. I believe that actuaries as a whole have a lot of valuable information and analysis to provide, not just to the insurance, pension, and government, but also to many other industries. I think it's really important that we expand the marketing effort that we have now. Instead of directing it as much as it is right now towards actuaries and how the SOA views actuaries, how the membership views actuaries, I think it should be much more oriented towards getting actuaries much more involved in media. I believe there should be training programs for actuaries. I think that they should be referred much more frequently into the media as the go-to place to get answers to all of the different things that are going on in various parts of society. I think once we expand that marketing effort and actuaries as both a title and as a recognized expert in analyzing risk and other associated analysis, we will wind up with a much stronger demand from other businesses to employ actuaries and to involve actuaries. But it has to really start here with our organized marketing efforts, not just to make all the members feel good, but to actually get the world talking about actuaries in general conversation.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer?
I'm quite passionate about the fact that actuaries shouldn't be placed in a box. And I think to some extent we each, as a professional actuary, have ownership of that, but also the Society of Actuaries can help. So I think it's very important that we partner with professionals from other fields on research and on getting things out in the media so that they see the value of actuarial training. And I think partnering on those types of projects is our best way to demonstrate the value that actuaries can add to either related fields within our traditional companies or new fields like financial services and banking, other areas where actuaries bring compatible skills. And I think we need to look for those opportunities, and the SOA can facilitate sort of opening some doors, and then it's up to each of us as actuaries to look for ways to stretch for what we're taking on as responsibilities in our own roles.
Thank you, Jennifer. Craig?
Hi. I agree this is a potentially serious risk, one that has not overall for the profession come to huge fruition yet, but we've certainly seen some hints of it in the decline of defined benefit pension plans contributing towards the problem, and more recently in the last few years a greater trend towards actuarial outsourcing in India and other low-cost markets. So this is something we very definitely need to be aware of as an organization and working to prevent. The best way to prevent the irrelevancy of actuaries is to continue to grow and to continue to learn. In any individual or any organization or any profession that ceases learning and growing begins to die. In the last couple of years, I've been the SOA board partner for research, and I'm a passionate believer in the value of research. I've served on the Research Expanding Boundaries Pool Committee that oversees the awarding of grants that are designed specifically to fund research that is expanding boundaries of the profession, and we've endowed a number of research projects towards that end. I think there are some fields that are particularly, where that is particularly important and a plausible opportunity for us, and one that I'm quite passionate about right now is the field of big data and predictive analytics. If I look at the work that's being done in those fields by companies like Amazon, Netflix, Google, what have you, the number of leaders in that market, to my knowledge, no actuaries are involved in that work. There may be some, but I'm not aware of them. And it seems to me that the skill sets required for that work are such that actuaries should own that market. We really should. So I think it's largely a matter of education and also publicity about our capabilities in that area. Towards that end, that's one reason I'm glad we're getting involved in general insurance as well, because that's one area that is starting to be more serious and has been for a number of years in that field. I think we have an opportunity to learn from what they've done and apply it to our field as well. Thank you.
The next question will start off with Jennifer. The SOA strategic plan states that we will do research that informs the public. What do you see as the considerations for the SOA in pursuing this?
This is actually a topic that I've given a lot of thought to as I chaired our task force on public policy, and I think it's very important that the SOA is present in this space. It's research that we haven't typically done, but I think as we've gone through from pension crisis and as we've gone through healthcare reform, we've certainly heard from our membership that the voice of actuaries was not out there, that they weren't hearing from people that had their skill set quoted as frequently or as often. Certainly there was participation, but it wasn't as present as they wished that it would have been. I think it's important that we stick to doing research on topics where actuaries have a reason to have expertise and not just pick any topic. Like global warming is a big topic, and perhaps there's some aspect of it that is appropriate for actuaries, but we would want to pick a part of it that's appropriate and not just go after a general topic. I think it's important that we look at partnering with other organizations. They need to be aware of what we're doing, and ideally we would bring it forward with the CIA or the Academy. That makes our work the strongest, but I think one of the changes is that we don't want to necessarily be limited to work that we do with the other organizations.
Thank you, Jennifer. Craig?
This is clearly a sensitive issue in some ways, in that it can cause some inter-organization conflict. But I do believe that the SOA is a research and education organization, and we do have an obligation to conduct research and provide education both to our members and to the public on a variety of issues. And that's one of the roles of the board and the section councils and the various research or committees within the SOA to decide what sort of necessary research needs to be done and what's appropriate. We have done some research recently on healthcare reform, which was somewhat controversial, but I think necessary and important to do. We recently commissioned the Blue Ribbon Panel report on the public pension industry in the United States. I'm a strong believer that that was an appropriate body of research to do as well. And we've also, Jennifer mentioned climate change, and that's one area where the Society and the other actuarial organizations have been working together in the United States or North America to look at the actuarial aspects of work there, including simple issues like in doing long-term climate forecasts and looking at the financial implications of climate change, what sort of discount rate should be used. Perhaps a simple issue on the surface, but one with potentially huge implications in an area where actuaries have a lot of experience to bring to bear on that angle of the topic. And I'm very glad to see the Society involved in topics like that.
Thank you, Craig. Jim?
Yes, I have a slightly different view. I certainly do view that as the Society's major mission of doing research, that we should be heading up a lot of these research projects. We certainly should be doing them in a way that encourages the output to be from the actuarial profession, not just from the Society of Actuaries. Therefore, my feeling is that in every endeavor we do, that we always partner up with the other actuarial organizations who have a similar say, especially when we're talking about public policy and or societal issues. So, for example, when we did that Class Act project I talked about, the Academy was so tied up with the health portion of the ACA that they didn't have time to do any of the background work. So it was strictly the SOA long-term care section that actually performed the work. But once we had finished it, we then turned it over to the Academy to put into an issue brief and distribute, and it came out as a jointly produced SOA Academy program. And I think that's the way we should approach all the programs that aren't what I will call internal research, just for the Society of Actuaries members.
Thank you, Jim. The next question we'll start off with Craig. It's a general question we've been asked a couple of times, and that many of you have touched on it already, but it's obviously important enough. I'd like to pose this again. If you're elected President-Elect, what would you do to address the relations and cooperation among the U.S.-based organizations? Craig?
I have a fairly strong feeling that this is perhaps the most important issue faced by the Society of Actuaries today, or certainly the most pressing issue. Inter-organization relationships, when they're damaged, hamper the effectiveness of all organizations. Sitting on the board for the last few years, I've also seen that the conflict with the other organizations has been an incredible distraction and consumed far more of our time than was necessary or than was desirable, and probably distracted us from doing other work that we could do. So we have to work on this very clearly. I think many of the organizational conflict issues we've had have resulted from a culture of dueling press releases rather than people talking to people. And I'm a firm believer that when people sit down and talk to each other, the leaders of various organizations, and lay their goals down on the table, lay their interests down on the table, that common ground can be found on which both or all organizations can work to build from. I would like to see, if I were elected President-Elect, the leaders of the Academy and the leaders of the Casualty Actuarial Society come in and talk to the SOA board, the entire board, describe their concerns, describe their goals, describe what they need, what they want, what their plans are for the future, and have us do similar exercises for their boards. And then have representatives of all those organizations come down, sit down together and say, how can we work together? Will that lead to consolidation down the road? Perhaps. I do believe that that would be a good long-term goal for that to happen. But I think that consolidation can only happen if we first develop an effective working relationship and can talk to each other without fear of reprisal. And that's how we've got to start.
Thank you, Craig. Jim?
Yes, I actually do believe that the key to the actuarial profession, showing better, getting these media opportunities, presenting solutions, is by having the organizations work very closely together. To that extent, I've had a chance to kind of get a feel for it because as I went through the nomination process, I did call up a lot of actuaries cold call style. And I purposely chose several of the president-elects and the presidents of the other organizations to specifically talk about this issue. And I am convinced that all the organizations do want to work together. However, they all have very sensitive points that if you step on those, you create rifts between the organizations. I believe that one of the best ways, and it's something that we should pursue, especially during the winter board meetings, which are not associated with any of our other actuarial meetings, that we should actually invite all the other organizations to hold their winter board meetings together with us in a same location. We would all hold our individual board meetings in separate meeting rooms, but we would do all the social and food functions together. That way we not only get the leaders of the boards together, we get the whole boards interacting with each other, and perhaps even more importantly, since all the boards for all the organizations are volunteers that come, that pass through and go, we'd get all the staffs together from the different organizations. And I think that's the key to creating a very harmonious relationship between the different organizations and working as a group of organizations for the betterment of the actuarial profession.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer?
Right. I think that all of these organizations care very deeply about our profession, and they also care about meeting the needs of each of their members. The challenges come in when we have different approaches to how that is, and I think we can't go backwards, but we can figure out good ways to work together in the future. When I came onto the SOA board, all of the new board members from all of the different actuarial organizations were held a training together, so we actually got to meet each other and hear a little bit about each of the organizations right from the beginning, and I think that's a potential idea that we could go back to. I think it's important that we keep dialogue, and so I keep our communication channels open. I do think that there's some efficiencies that could be gained from consolidation, but it's not something you do from a one-sided perspective. So certainly I'd be open to talking with other organizations about that topic, but it's not going to be a key thing that I'm looking to accomplish. But I think talking to the leaders on a regular basis is very important, and looking for where our common ground, serving all of our members and serving the profession, it has to be at the foundation of it. And I'll just point out I have been a volunteer for the Academy, so I know lots of people who do volunteer there as well, and we're all professional actuaries and enjoy many of the same goals, and I think that's the part that we need to focus on.
Thank you, Jennifer. The next question will start with Jim. And, excuse me, I've received a follow-up to the previous question. I'd like to pose that as well. As follow-up, what does each candidate see as the biggest challenge in the organizations working together, and how can that be addressed? Jim?
I think the biggest challenge that the organizations have in working together is presenting a unified actuarial profession position, rather than taking the position that this is the SOA view, or this is the Academy view, or this is the CAS view, or the CIA view, or the CCA view. And I think by doing some of these things that bring all the parties together on a regular basis so that they can get comfortable working with each other is absolutely the best way to lead to that solution. As long as each of the organizations does not put too much of their own ego into it and is willing to do what's best for the actuarial profession, I think we will get the best result for the actuarial profession.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer?
I think there's lots of little pieces that cause us to have challenges. The overwhelming one might be that each organization tends to think that we're the one that actually cares about the profession, and I think we tend to overlook the amount of passion that each of the organizations have for the profession as a whole and making it look good to the American public, to the North American public, to the international world of actuaries. A couple of the really specific thorns at the moment, of course, are the SOA's entry into the general insurance world and our focus on research for public policy purposes. But I think some of that goes back to the communication, working together to say, why are we doing it, what's our focus, and looking for places that we can work together. And maybe these areas, like general insurance, we could eventually bring the exams together if we wanted to work together. Research on public policy, we could eventually present with members of the Academy or the CIA. So there's opportunities to work together, but we need to look for other opportunities outside of the thorny issues to build our relationships. So finding the sort of the common ground on other areas to strengthen the relationships, I think, is what's going to get us through the thorny patches.
Thank you, Jennifer. Craig?
I think the single biggest factor by far is trust. In my experience, the members or the leadership of the other organization has been caught by surprise in the last few years by some of the initiatives we've pursued, and as a natural consequence, I suspect that there's a lack of trust of us involved in that. In a related matter, I think because we are clearly the dominant organization in terms of membership size, there is a concern that the other organizations would be subsumed into this organization with loss of their individual identity, their individual character, their individual history, and their leadership. And I think that we have to go a long ways to convince the other organizations that we're not launching a hostile takeover. What we're doing is finding a way to work together. That working together might mean a single organization several years down the road, but in the meantime we need to look for small baby steps of things we can do together in order to gradually build that trust back up more. That will involve talking to each other rather than writing letters to each other. It will involve meeting with each other rather than talking to each other on the phone. I think through those small steps we can gradually build a trust and overcome some of the history of less personal contact that has given rise to animosity in the past. Along the way, we also have to, as we get to know each other, manage to convince each other that no, we all care about each other as people, as professionals, and we care about each profession's obligation to members, and that we're all going to work together for the good of the society and for the good of each organization.
Thank you, Craig. Jim? I'm sorry. This question will be directed to Craig and not Jim. It's a new round. The SOA has developed a general insurance or property casualty track. What are your views on this new track, and how would you measure the success of the program? And Jennifer will start off with this question. Thank you.
So the Society of Actuaries got involved in the property casualty, or otherwise known as general insurance space, mostly because our growing membership in Asia doesn't distinguish in their companies and in their training between needing to know life insurance and financial math and pension and general insurance. I'd add health, but health isn't as common there. But in order to have a complete credential, we needed to have this as part of it. So I think it's really important that we're doing it. We have made an opportunity for actuaries in the U.S. to take those same exams and become credentialed the same way, but the real focus is for the global purpose of meeting the needs of people in other countries. As the middle class grows in other countries, what they need first is insurance for cars, for houses, and then eventually becomes life or income or something like that. And so it's really part of the growing markets in other countries on the P&C track. In terms of viewing the success, obviously we want to know how many people are taking our exams, how many different countries are represented by people who are taking exams, and to watch that grow. Then we will look at how much professional development we are delivering in topics that are relevant to actuaries that are practicing in general insurance, and how many different people we can pull in as volunteers who support both the exam process as well as research and professional development in that field.
Thank you, Jennifer. Craig?
I fear that my answer will sound remarkably similar to Jennifer's, but I'll try to give a slightly different spin on it. I too am a firm believer in the need for general insurance. I work in a firm that offers consulting on a number of fronts, but both general insurance and life and health insurance, and we're international in nature. And frankly, our colleagues in other countries are baffled by the fact that in the U.S., the consultants on the general insurance and the life insurance don't interact together, except very rarely, almost never work together, whereas over there, not only do they work together, they're often the same people. I've also done work in a number of different markets around the world, as I mentioned earlier, and as Jennifer noted, these are the same actuaries doing the same work with usually the same organizations. Our structure is baffling to the rest of the world. I'm a firm believer in the necessity for international expansion, and if we're going to have international expansion, we have to work the way the rest of the world works. And that requires having both a general insurance and a life insurance track. Will that happen rapidly? No. It's going to be a slow start as we gain credibility both in the U.S. and outside the U.S. in our general insurance capabilities. Primarily, our work will be involved in promoting that work outside the U.S. I'd be very happy, or would not mind at all, if the vast majority of our non-life growth was outside the U.S. I think that we're going to measure success. We're going to know we're succeeding at that if we have a large number of candidates taking exams, a large number of members, if we have employer and government recognition of our general insurance track, And if we've got a large volunteer base that's providing lots of continuing education and carrying out valuable research.
Thank you, Craig. Jim?
I have a slightly different viewpoint of this issue. I believe that what we should do is we should go to the Casualty Actuarial Society. We should offer to jointly administer the exams, with us doing most of the work on the educational side, which I think they and we believe are better, but with that educational process leading to their ACAS or FCAS designations. To the extent that they do want to expand with us internationally, that would still hold well and true for providing the same service in the international community. Likewise, I think they would have no objection at all, if they don't think that's one of their goals, to ceding that function to us in providing the education and then granting the FCAS or ACAS to the Casualty Actuarial Society. I think they have an interest in doing education with us directly, and I think they have an interest in expanding internationally. I think they probably don't have the resources, and I think if we brought that proposal to them, that they would welcome it and that we would have very smooth operations, and as an actuarial profession we would be providing both the general insurance and the life health pension.
Thank you, Jim. I believe we have one more question before we have our closing question, so I would ask everyone to be very brief. This will be directed firstly to Craig. How would you ensure that the SOA continues to have a major role in the education of its Canadian members?
This can be a challenging issue. The Society has a long history of working cooperatively with the CIA and providing education to the Canadian members. In recent years, that has been somewhat stressed by the CIA decision to offer a university accreditation program. And the SOA has elected, with my full support, not to recognize credit for the university education program they have in Canada. While I have not talked to leaders of the CIA, I'm certain that's somewhat displeasing to them, but I think it's important and it's consistent with the views of our members. I think the decision not to recognize the UAP was the right decision to make, although I'm sure not everyone will agree with me. I think the key, though, to continuing to have a strong relationship with the CIA will be to continue to offer Canadian relevant content on the exams whenever it's possible to do so. There are a large number of Canadian volunteers for the SOA, and fortunately for us, a significant portion of them are involved in the education system that we have. So I think this is a natural and easy to do thing to continue to develop that content. It seems highly likely that the CIA on their current trajectory is going to start recognizing other pathways for getting accreditation, for example, the UAP program. But I believe as long as we have solid Canadian content in our exams, we will be viewed as a valued partner by the CIA.
Thank you, Craig. Jim?
Once again, I have a slightly different view. I think that it's really important that we work closely with the CIA. I think the CIA's university educational program is excellent, and many of their universities are accredited as part of our CAE accreditation program of universities. I do agree that we can't grant credit directly based on those university courses. However, what I had suggested at the time we first viewed this subject while I was on the board, I believe that what we should have for the people who have successfully completed the first 5 exams with essentially the material from a university setting, whether it be in Canada or the U.S., be eligible to take a comprehensive exam, similar in scope and difficulty to a bar exam or a med board, that they would take over 1 or 2 days, and if they successfully passed that, they would be granted the ASA designation, thus preserving the quality of the designation and assuring that they did actually get the content necessary to be able to exhibit that they've successfully completed that coursework.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer?
I think first we need to respect that the Canadian Institute of Actuaries really wants to have more control over the education of Canadian actuaries. and certainly that's, appropriate. So we need to have good communication with them. We need to work together to understand what their desires are and to make sure that to the best that we can accomplish it, that the content on our exams meets their needs for their educational goals. And one of the key ways is by having as many Canadian volunteers on those exam committees as we do have. We get a lot of fantastic support that way. They also have moved into the University Accreditation Program, and they provide, they've studied it extensively, and they provide very much oversight of the universities where they are going to allow credits. So I think, we'll look at what the mutual recognition could be once somebody actually gets as far as earning their credential, because they can't actually earn the full credential with the university-based education. I don't think it's an appropriate thing for the United States. Our actuaries are educated in so many different universities that studying it and providing oversight would be really impractical in the United States. So I think that's one of those places we have to recognize that there simply is a difference in how actuaries are educated, and recognize that we do respect actuaries from other areas, like from Britain, where there's an education provided at university as well. So the Canadians aren't the first to march down that path. Here again, communication is really important, staying open and recognizing what are the specific goals and how best we can partner with the CIA.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jim, you'll be the first to respond to this. Opportunity to talk about how passionate you are about the profession, and the question is, what would you like your legacy as president to be, or what's the one thing that you would like the board to accomplish at the end of your term? Jim?
Well, first of all, there clearly isn't just one thing that I will do want to accomplish, but there is one thing that's probably not on the current list of strategic goals and opportunities that I would like to see added to it that perhaps could be my legacy. And that would be that I think the board as a whole should look at the strategic issues around how it involves membership, how it encourages more volunteerism, and how it makes its CPD enhance the credential without being just solely a source of subsidizing the profitability. And I think that it can do that by a number of things. One, I believe that the society should take all of its programs and look at how does it maximize participation, not at a loss, but not specifically to generate fixed, say, 30% profit margins. Two, I think that it should provide all of the materials for CPD accreditation every year in some web-based, non-cost method. And I think that can be as simple as posting webcasts, as simple as having sessions from the various meetings there, as simple as having the sections each have as their mission to develop CPD that's pertinent to their membership that then gets posted on the website. Likewise, I think there are incredible opportunities to save money in the way things are done on an operational level. And I think that there should be a view not towards taking the easiest path to saving whatever money is available. And I know personally from my work as the executive director of the LTCI that the Society of Actuaries could be saving $1 million to $2 million a year just on its costs of the CPD programs, but in many other ways too, just by introducing negotiation process into vendor processes. I think it's a strategic positioning that the board needs to provide so that all the staff people can then implement that process.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer?
First off, I kind of hate this question because I don't view it as a personal legacy. This is something that we do together as a full board. There are 28 of us, and certainly as president, you are a leader and you're representing the organization around the world, and that's very important. So that sort of goes to what I want it to be about. I want the profession to be stronger, and that's internationally. So that means that actuaries are more visible. That's in the media, that's in our own companies, that's with our clients. We should be producing relevant research so that there's a reason for it to be visible in the media, and that working actuaries feel like they're supported. It probably means we're working better together with other actuarial organizations, and that's why the profession as a whole is stronger. And we have a growing number of members that are outside of North America, and we need to be increasing the ways that we support them with research, with professional development, partnering with their local actuarial organizations so that they feel like they're getting value from their SOA credential. And if we do all of those things right, and we support what it means to be professional and have high integrity as an actuary in a lot of these developing markets, then hopefully we end up with a profession that is stronger, and that would be my goal.
Thank you, Jennifer. Craig?
One of the biggest surprises I had on coming onto the SOA board was the extent to which the board considered itself to be running a business. And I had always thought of the SOA as an organization, a membership organization that was a service organization, which it is, but it also is to a certain extent a business that views itself in competition with the Academy, with the CAS, with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, with other actuarial organizations around the world. I accept and understand that a certain amount of that is necessary, but if I could have our board be remembered for one thing during my term, it would be to shift the scales away from a scale of cutthroat competition and closer towards cooperation and working effectively with those organizations and having created a culture of trust between the organizations. If we've done that, I will have considered my term to be a tremendous success. That said, Jim has mentioned in particular a couple of times where he thinks that things should happen cooperatively with the other organizations. I fully support that idea where it's practical, but I also do recognize there will be times when the other organizations are just not interested in pursuing particular initiatives that we feel are important to pursue. Those will still happen, but hopefully it will be in only when necessary. I'd also like to see the profession or the board be known for one that contributed meaningfully to expanding the boundaries of our profession and getting into new areas where actuaries are not currently working. And probably the third thing that I think is very important we haven't mentioned yet, I would like to see my term be one where the society makes meaningful progress at opening the profession more broadly to women and minority groups that are not adequately represented within the profession at this time.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Jim and Jennifer. This is the end of our questions. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind everyone that the elections will open August the 18th and close 5 p.m. sharp on September the 5th. Thank you. Pat?
Thanks, Earl. We have come to the end of our time together today. Thanks, Earl, for moderating the webcast, and thank you to our President-Elect candidates. We'd also like to thank our members for participating in today's session. I hope you found this webcast valuable as you consider your voting in the SOA elections. And if you're eligible, please don't forget to vote. Elections do open August 18th. Have a great day, everyone.